What if the words you've never read are the ones your soul has always known? Picture a place where time doesn't bury memories, it merely hushes them. A monastery carved into stone, hidden among the ancient valleys of Ethiopia. There, shrouded in shadows and incense, lies a manuscript absent from official history, a forgotten gospel, a whisper outside the scriptures. You might not know it, but it knows you. This isn't a historical account. It's an intimate call, meant for those who hear beyond what's spoken, for those who sense that parts of the truth were stifled by convenience, shaped by empires, cloaked in dogma, and forgotten. For centuries, we've spoken of Jesus through the lens of a Western doctrine, one that trimmed the mystery in favor of order. But what if there's another version? Not just of the man, but of the message. Not as myth or fable, but as a memory pulsing through buried archives and dormant hearts. In 1968, deep within Ethiopia, a manuscript dating back to 123 AD was discovered. A fragment, a breath, words attributed to Jesus yet absent from the recognized Gospels, an uncanonized scripture, and perhaps for that very reason, alive. Have you ever felt that something in the official story doesn't quite fit? That something essential is missing, like a hidden note in a familiar song? Maybe that void isn't a mistake, but a veil. This video won't provide answers. It will provoke. It won't convince. It will echo, because some things can only be felt. And perhaps this forgotten manuscript is one of them. A text never authorized, but perhaps recognized within. So if you've come this far, maybe it's not out of curiosity, maybe it's out of remembrance, because something resonates silently within you, waiting for someone to softly say, "You're not lost. You're remembering." Now take a deep breath, listen with your body, and let these ancient, burned, and forgotten words cross time to find you. This is the beginning of something that perhaps never truly ended. Because sometimes what was erased is exactly what's missing in you. Absence as revelation. Why were certain texts hidden? In every spiritual tradition, silence plays an ambiguous role. It both reveals and conceals. But when silence is imposed, not as reverence, but as censorship, it becomes a wound. Throughout history, dozens of texts attributed to Jesus, his disciples, and early initiates were deliberately excluded from what we know as the Bible. Not due to a lack of spirituality, but because they held too much freedom. Not because of a lack of faith, but because they carried too much mystery. What was silenced perhaps spoke too much. Imagine a truth that doesn't fit into formulas, a teaching that can't be tamed by power structures. That truth doesn't vanish. It transforms into a vibrant absence, and that absence is the revelation. The missing gospel isn't lost. It's hidden in the invisible layers of collective consciousness, waiting to be deciphered. What if what was stripped from sacred scriptures still echoes in humanity's unconscious? The spiritual wound of an incomplete truth. For some, the Bible suffices. For others, it feels incomplete, as if something essential is missing, something only the soul perceives. This sensation isn't spiritual arrogance. It's longing, a longing for what was torn from the body of tradition. The exclusion of texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, Mary Magdalene, and Philip, didn't just erase words. It erased paths. Paths of self-knowledge, of inner divinity, of union without intermediaries. The amputation of intimate sacredness birthed a religion centered on the external, on dogma, on control, and this created a silent wound, a spirituality starving for meaning. The dilemma between inherited faith and forgotten wisdom. You grew up hearing that faith means accepting without questioning, but perhaps your soul wants to remember before believing. Between the faith inherited from parents and institutions and the wisdom pulsing in history's forgotten corners lies an intimate dilemma. It's not about rebellion, it's about spiritual maturity. Walking with blind faith can be comforting, but walking with lucidity is transformative. The official tradition offers answers. The forgotten Gospels provoke questions. And perhaps what you need now aren't answers, but the right questions. How? Can a silent manuscript scream within us? When something essential is taken from us, we don't just stop knowing, we start seeking. It's as if absence becomes a vibrational field attracting what's missing. The missing gospel doesn't need to be found. It already whispers in dreams. It burns in lingering doubts. It appears in coincidences that feel like more than chance. This silent gospel screams in ways beyond words. It pulses in phrases we've never heard, yet touch us as if they're memories. What if this lost manuscript isn't outside? What if it's waiting to be read within? Because spiritual truth doesn't need to be taught. It just needs to be awakened. The real story behind the discovered manuscript. In 1968, near the mountains of Lalibela in Ethiopia, an ancient fragment was found amidst a nearly forgotten monastic library. Wrapped in aged leather and protected by layers of silence and devotion, the manuscript contained words attributed to Yeshua, Jesus, dated to 123 AD. It wasn't an extensive document, but its content was enough to shake any notion that everything about Christ has already been said. There, among metaphors and vivid images, was the echo of an untamed wisdom, an echo that didn't aim to establish a religion, but to awaken consciousness. The manuscript was never considered official by Western tradition. It wasn't canonized or widely disseminated, but it survived. And sometimes surviving erasure is the clearest sign that something still pulses. Ethiopia as guardian of non-Roman spiritual memory. While the Roman Empire consolidated Christianity under dogmas, lists, and councils, Ethiopian Christianity flourished as a living tradition, breathing to the rhythm of mystery. Ethiopia has never been just an African country. It has been and still is an archetypal space, a symbolic womb where forgotten truths hide, awaiting reunion. For centuries, Ethiopian monks hand-copied texts the Western world chose to forget. There, the sacred wasn't institutionalized, it was lived, and it was on this sacred ground, among stones that seemed to whisper, that the 123 AD manuscript emerged, not as proof, but as memory. Words attributed to Jesus absent from canonical gospels. The manuscript doesn't present miracles. It doesn't speak of punishments. It doesn't invoke doctrines. Instead, it reveals phrases that feel like mirrors. Don't seek outside what already screams within. The kingdom is in the pause between one thought and the next. God isn't on altars. He's in the gap between silence and breath. These words weren't recorded by power evangelists, but by mystery listeners. They don't shout to convince. They whisper to remind. And perhaps that's why they were excluded. Because they speak to those who feel, not to those who control. The vibrational implications of a text never validated. True spirituality doesn't depend on external validation. It vibrates at another frequency. When you read something that touches your soul, the institution's seal doesn't matter. What matters is the intimate recognition. This manuscript, though forgotten by canons, resonates with those who are ready, because there are texts that, when read, read us back. And there are words not meant to convince the mind, but to awaken the spirit. What was burned outside may be intact within you, and perhaps it's time to let this gospel without an altar occupy the center of your silence. Jesus as an Eastern master, the lost lens of ancestral wisdom. For centuries, we've been taught to see Jesus through Western lenses, a moral legislator, a sacrificial redeemer, an intermediary between a distant God and a guilty humanity. But what if all this is just a fragment, a reduction? The early centuries of Christianity had a different tone, a more Eastern, more internal, more alchemical tone. Jesus was seen not just as the Son of God, but as a master of consciousness, a bearer of symbolic keys for the expansion of being. He spoke in parables, used images of nature, silently challenged rigid structures. He taught with gestures, with silence, with presence. His language was closer to Eastern mystics than to Western theologians, but that lens was forgotten. And when we forget the East, we lose the center. the symbolic erasure of a Gnostic and contemplative lineage. Long before councils and dogmas, Gnostic texts and traditions circulated, not in the modern, distorted sense of the word, but as lineages of inner wisdom. These traditions didn't seek to create belief systems. They offered paths to deep self-knowledge. Gnosis wasn't theory, it was experience. The direct experience of the divine within oneself. In these texts, Jesus wasn't an object of worship. He was a mirror, an initiator. But this Jesus was suppressed. The institutional church erased traces of silent contemplation and replaced them with mandatory creeds. And thus, we lost one of the most potent forms of spirituality, the one born from direct encounter with mystery. The conflict between doctrinal structure and inner experience. While doctrine defines what must be believed, spiritual experience is what is felt, even when there are no words. This conflict is ancient, but today it pulses in many of us. You might follow a religious tradition, but if it doesn't embrace your deepest doubts, it becomes a prison. Structure teaches that there's a right path, but the soul knows. The true path is the one that vibrates with meaning. And when that meaning disappears, only repetition remains, a void with the scent of incense. What this reveals about our own spiritual disconnections. This flaw in modern Christianity isn't just theological, it's human. It reveals how much we've disconnected from something essential, the sacred that breathes within. Our time is marked by a crisis of meaning, not because we've lost faith, but because we've lost connection with its inner source. We seek outside, but feel that something is missing inside. And perhaps this lack is the trace of the forgotten East, of the wisdom that was silenced, but never dead. It still lives. In your deepest silences, in your strange dreams, in the words that give you chills without explanation. What was forgotten by religion may be on the verge of being remembered by you. Forgotten metaphors, the tree, the river, the breath, and the sand. The Ethiopian manuscript doesn't offer doctrines or decrees. It speaks in metaphors, and metaphors are more than literary devices. They are soul maps. Here, Jesus is not a legislator. He is a gardener of symbols. He speaks of a tree growing between worlds, a river that does not wet, but awakens, a breath that does not inhale, but remembers, sand that holds the footprints of the spirit. Each image holds a hidden sense, a vibration that cannot be explained, only felt. And it is precisely this symbolic language that connects us to what lies beyond words. Symbolic language as spiritual. Technology. Carl Jung said symbols are bridges between the unconscious and the conscious. Edgar Cayce, in Altered States, saw archetypal images rising like the spirit's own alphabet, because the soul understands this language before it learns any other. These metaphors are not poetic flourishes. They are spiritual technologies. Just as a microchip carries invisible data, a symbol carries forgotten memory. Reading a symbol is awakening a remembrance. And the symbols in this Ethiopian manuscript, the tree, the river, the breath, do not describe the divine. They invite it. They don't explain God. They make you feel Him. Practice. How to identify the living symbols in your own journey. Close your eyes for a moment. What image repeats in your dreams? What place, object, or scene returns during meditation or moments of deep intuition? It might be a lake, a staircase, a mountain. That's your symbol. It's not random. It's a clue. Begin to observe it, not to analyze, but to be with it. Let it speak, because a symbol does not communicate in logic. It awakens by resonance, the archetype of the tree as a map between worlds. The tree is perhaps the oldest symbol of connection between realms. In the Ethiopian manuscript, it doesn't just represent life, it represents the bridge. Roots in the underworld, trunk in the earthly realm, branches in the celestial. The tree is a cosmic axis, a vertical body uniting past, present, and eternity. Jesus in this forgotten gospel is described as the branch between worlds. He didn't come to found a spiritual empire. He came to remember the way back through the inner tree, and what if the cross was, in essence, a distorted version of the tree of light? What if the true altar is you, standing between heavens and depths, with arms extended between who you were and who you're still becoming? The tree is within you, not as metaphor, as memory. The return to inner wisdom, through what you were never told. Sometimes revelation doesn't come with thunder. It comes with a silence that burns. It's not new truth we need, but old wisdom we've forgotten, and that kind of memory rarely arrives from pulpits. It rises from the fractures of an incomplete story, from the fragments that survived destruction, from the echoes preserved in the soul's underground. The Ethiopian manuscript from 123 AD may never be accepted by scholars or sanctified by religious authorities, but perhaps it doesn't need to be. Maybe it just needs to be felt. You don't have to believe in its words. You only need to notice what they stir in you. If something awakens, it wasn't the text, it was you. How a forgotten truth echoes as a soul memory. Truth doesn't convince, it recognizes. It arrives like a song you haven't heard in years, but still know by heart. Some read these words and feel nothing, others read them and weep without knowing why. That's not emotion, that's memory, soul memory. What this lost gospel does is not teach, it evokes. It evokes what was hidden not by accident, but by protection, and perhaps now is the time to let it emerge. Final question: what in you is extinguished yet still burns? Maybe it's not the world that's meaningless. Maybe it's you who's missing a symbol. There is a flame that hasn't gone out. It's only been buried under noise. Noise from inherited beliefs, borrowed fears, stories that never belonged to you, but it's still there. Quiet, steady, a whisper that refuses to go silent. What if this forgotten gospel isn't a document, but a spark? A fire hidden in the folds of your personal history, waiting for your recognition, connection with Cayce and Jung, integrating the denied to awaken the higher self. Carl Jung said what we reject becomes shadow, and integrating the shadow is the path to wholeness. Edgar Cayce, in his trances, saw past lives linked by patterns, symbols, and recurring wounds. Both knew this. The truth that transforms doesn't come from answers. It comes from reconciling what was denied, integrating this denied gospel inside and out is not a religious act. It is a rite of remembrance, because the higher self does not emerge by force. It awakens when we embrace the parts we once buried, and maybe now is your time, not to believe, but to listen to what still burns, even without flame, even in the dark. What if the gospel that was forgotten is the gospel of your soul? This wasn't just a video, it was a crossing, a symbolic return to the place where something in you first fell silent. From the beginning, we circled an absence, but not just any absence, the kind that speaks. The Ethiopian manuscript of 123 AD may never be quoted in sermons or studied in seminaries, but it belongs elsewhere. In the invisible, space where your soul holds questions too sacred to speak aloud. It belongs in the realm of unpermitted remembrance, in the hearts of those who feel before they believe. The tree of light it describes isn't in Jerusalem or Ethiopia. It's inside you, roots buried in your pain, a trunk made of your choices, branches stretching toward the sky of your consciousness. Maybe, as you listened, something in you stirred, as if the words weren't just being heard, but unearthed, as if you weren't watching a story, but recognizing a part of yourself that had no voice. That's not coincidence. In Cayce's view, the deepest revelations come not from outside. They arise when the soul's soil is ready to receive them. Carl Jung would call it synchronicity. The meeting of an external symbol with an inner need that was already waiting. So maybe this wasn't a piece of content. Maybe it was a return to a version of Jesus that lives in you, to a truth once silenced but never extinguished, to a gospel, unwritten in books, but inscribed in the quiet of your being. Now at the end, the question returns, transformed. What if everything you felt until now is a calling? Not to rebel, not to confront, but to integrate what was denied, to listen to what was erased, to recognize what still burns even if no one else believes the fire exists. You are not lost. You are remembering, and if this remembrance touched something in you, don't explain. Leave a mark, a space, a silent sign for others who are also remembering that they are not alone. Because those who see must recognize each other, and maybe, just maybe, the heaven you've been searching for isn't above, but beneath what was forgotten and is now being remembered.